triple option champ in Greg McElroy and the 2021 triple option champ in Stanford, Steve. So we are amongst greatness right now when it comes to handicapping.
I'm sure we're adding that on their graphic when they're on TV. Just behind national champion for McElroy when he played at Alabama, right?
Going high on the resume of both of them, I imagine. Greg, I do want to start with you here since you do have the strap. Early action has been on the Buckeyes. Let's focus on that game. Do you think Ohio State is equipped to keep it close with the defending champ?
Well, it's totally understandable why the early action would be on the Buckeyes. I totally get that. They've been very popular in Vegas all season long, and understandably so. If you look at the firepower that they display and look at what's given Georgia some fits in recent years. They lost last year, the only game they've lost, really it feels like in forever, to Alabama because Alabama had elite weapons at wide receiver, Jamison Williams being the best example. Now, they also didn't play against Bama with their best weapons. Jamison Williams got hurt in the early going of the national championship game. Georgia ultimately won that game naturally. So I can understand why people would look at and say, well, Georgia's vulnerable against passing attacks. But man, I'd hammer Georgia in this particular spot because I think Georgia's a lot more like Michigan. And I don't think the issues that were on display for Ohio State against Michigan can get resolved in a month's time. I think they got some flaws in the front seven defensively. So I love Georgia in this spot.
Steve, how do you feel about that? Do you like Georgia that much, or would you be hesitant to lay that many points?
Well, Greg talked about the things that were exposed for Ohio State, and when I think about that, I think about their offensive line and the idea of what makes Ohio State dangerous. It's given C.J. Stroud time to throw those deep routes, and I just don't know. Georgia's going to give you one-on-one opportunities, but we saw the difference in C.J. Stroud in 10 games leading up to Michigan, and then in the Michigan game. When he had guys in his face, he was a little bit of a different player. Not as effective, not as accurate. So I think Georgia, with their athletic ability, and they're only getting better. I mean, Gerard Carter's probably going to be the best player on the field when Georgia's defense is out there. So that's what worries me about Ohio State. I think they're going to have to throw it a ton in order to win this game. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep C.J. Stroud upright the whole game.
Doug, what are your question marks surrounding this particular matchup?
Who is Ohio State? Because we've given them the benefit of the doubt the last handful of years, and they earned it for most of that run. But the last couple of years, after losing to Michigan, they don't get that deference. The Big Ten has been a step slow in all these sort of matchups with the SEC over the years, and we've seen blowouts every single season in the college football playoff. Michigan was not good enough to be on the same field as Georgia last year. I do think this Bulldogs team is a notch below last year's squad and at times inconsistent, but at their best, I'm with Greg. I don't think they belong on the same field. I just think there's too many weaknesses with Ohio State, and speed is one of them. Georgia will just run over them.
Georgia at less than a TD. Michigan pushed Ohio State around. Georgia's going to push them around. Ohio State played 3 games that are worth discussing. Notre Dame, they barely got by them. Penn State, they needed a fourth quarter miracle comeback, and then they got beat up by Michigan. 3 big games for Georgia. They absolutely annihilated Oregon. They limited Tennessee to their worst offensive output of the season, and that's the best offense in the country. And then they cracked LSU in the SEC championship game. They'll get up. They'll put it on them.
All right, let's move to that other semifinal matchup, TCU, Michigan. Greg, we have seen blowouts in the semifinal portion quite frequently of the college football playoff. Is it potentially a spot here where Michigan just outclasses TCU on the field?
Well, here's what scares me, guys. Like, I saw that opening total at 60.5, and my alarm was going off. Like, I love the over. Absolutely love the over. This is going to be a track meet. TCU can't stop the run. I don't think Michigan's going to be able to keep up through the air. And then all of a sudden that line drops, and I panic. So it's down to now 59. I think TCU is one of those teams you never really want to mess with. Even though that Michigan is a second-half football team, they've dominated opponents in the second half. They came into the Big Ten championship game plus 205 in the second half in points per game differential. I would kind of slow play the first half a little bit and then hammer down on Michigan in the second half. That's been kind of the way to play them all year long. The problem is TCU has had 5 second-half comebacks, and going into the Big 12 championship game, they were 5-0 when down in the second half and or the fourth quarter. That includes an 18-point comeback against the team that just beat them, Kansas State, a real team, where they took care of business, ended up winning that game, scored 4 unanswered touchdowns, winning it 38-28 back in October. So I kind of like, if I had to play this game, I like the over at 59, and I kind of like waiting until the second half and then firing on Michigan in the second half, where I think they can probably beat down TCU enough on the ground to pull away.
It's interesting the way you want to attack this, and you mentioned it there, Greg. The line has moved 9.5 to 7.5. Doug, I saw you trying to jump in there.
Yeah,
real
well,
quick.
I'm so happy to see him in full degenerate. It's going to come to a point where Greg's going to be the sharpest college football handicapper who happened to play college football back in the day and win a national championship. But you're right, the line did. There was one bet that came in on TCU that moved the market, some to 7, and then it got bet up to 7.5. So I think we stay at 7.5 the rest of the way. But Michigan's been amazing in the first half, not covering. They've been a total second half team this year.
All right, big fella, Stanford Steve. What do you make of that steam behind the Horned Frogs? Do you think they can keep it close?
I do. Greg touched on the over. I think it's a great call because I love the approach of both offenses. I thought TCU does a great job of getting the ball in their best players' hands, and then that even counted in the fourth quarter when Duggan just said, screw it, I'm going to keep the ball after I screwed it up and threw that pick in the end zone. So I think they're going to have a good plan. I want to see how the run game. I think TCU, it's enormous for them to stay in manageable situations in the first half. They can't be in second and third and longs all game, or they're really, really in trouble, because then they're going to get hits on Duggan. And as far as Michigan, they just keep getting better and better, and that all goes with the quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. I asked in the week before the Illinois game, are we finally going to have to see J.J. McCarthy throw the ball in order to Michigan win that game? And that, unfortunately, we see the injuries, and he does get a couple late drives because he threw the ball. And maybe a beneficial pass interference call along the way. But I think McCarthy is playing as well as he has all year. He's ascended the whole season, and Duggan is Duggan. So I like the over. I do like Greg's call that first half. That's where I think the game is. We both know they're second. We all know they're both second half teams. But what's that first half going to look like when teams are trying to fill each other out?
Joseph, how do you feel about this one?
TCU at more than a touchdown. I think the handicap for them is that they haven't had a bye week since September. They have been playing big game after big game. No one's going to benefit from the rest more than them. They were banged up going into their games at the end of the season. Every single game is an emotional high wire act, and now they have 3-4 weeks to get ready, get situated, get healthy, and plan for an opponent. Nobody's going to benefit from the break more than TCU.
I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I do like TCU and the points, but I actually think Michigan's going to win the national championship.
Ooh.
I think Harbaugh is that great. He's won wherever he's gone. He turned San Diego, not San Diego State, San Diego into a winning program. Stanford he turned around, did in the NFL, came within a whisker of winning it all in the Super Bowl. He's been an absolute stud in terms of coaching. I think this Michigan team can get it done against Georgia. Now the question is, with the speed and TCU, a fresh TCU team, I actually think the Horned Frogs are much better than people realize, and their defense is, I want to say top 35 in defensive efficiency. They showed it against Texas. Other games, not so much. But I think they hang around this game, and Michigan's slow start's also part of that equation.
Greg McElroy, you hear Doug say he thinks Michigan is going to win the national title. What say you?
I think it's the best value play on the board. I mean, if I can get TCU at 15-1, I might sprinkle a little cheddar on that, but seems like a long shot. I think that if you had to make a play, that's the play. I just don't like the price right now on Georgia. It just feels like too much of a slam dunk. Plus, I just don't like, and I know Steve's been listening to it. I'm sure y'all have heard some of it. Man, you listen to Georgia fans and people around the Georgia program, it's almost as if they're already planning the parade. Let's just slow the roll a bit right now, all right? There's still a lot that needs to be accomplished. I think Georgia's the best team, no doubt. But I do think Michigan has the right recipe along the line of scrimmage to neutralize Georgia's best attributes. So I think it's going to be a fascinating game if those two teams tee it up the way I think they're going to. But ultimately, I think it's tough to out Georgia. So I'm still leaning towards the Dogs.
Yeah, I mean, their best is better than anyone's. The question is, will they consistently play that in the 8 quarters in the playoff?
Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as far as value, Michigan for sure. I think people are going to see that. I still think these semifinal lines are going to move around a little bit, guys, because I still think you're going to have your Michigan people come in at the end. As Joe talked about, TCU plus more than a touchdown. I think about that, but value, I guess so. It's just we're scarred because of so many blowouts, so we're assuming it's going to be Michigan and Georgia there. I don't want to see that. I kind of want to see an upset for once in one of these games. But I will say an ending here with the triple option regarding I do feel I finally could put myself in the same sentence as Tim Tebow, because in 2008, Tebow stood there, held that SEC trophy in McElroy's face, and then a year later, McElroy went and took it right out of his hands. So now I know what Tim Tebow felt like in 08.
Yeah, very
and
similar.
09.
circle.
Full
Yeah.
circle.
I had to circle
Very
Steve in the
Stanford
offseason. Circle him up. That's right.
Similar hairstyles.
Bulletin board
types.
material.
Yeah.
A lot of commonality between
Very
Stanford Steve
similar.
and Tim Tebow.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.